Welcome to the Filmmaker and Fans podcast. In this week's episode, we explore the 1954 film classic Rear Window, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Using the Hitchcock classic as our foundation, we talk about everything from understanding your craft as a director to the subjective nature of art. As a reminder, if you'd like to see the actual scene that we watched at the beginning of the episode, head on over to our YouTube channel at Filmmaker and Fans for the full video.
You decide one day that you're going to make a movie, and people think like there's divine intervention, that someone arrives at your door and hands you a screenplay and says 6 months from now you're going to be shooting. What happens, very much like a podcast or whatever this is going to become, you have no idea, except you have an impulse, a bit of creative inspiration. Your muse has touched, in your case, you're on my brow, and we've decided that we want to do something, but we don't know yet how it's going to be manifest. And we don't know even what the final result is. We can imagine what it might be, but we don't know until we have this creative interaction that you and I are going to be having over the coming months to know what the thing's going to be. So this podcast, I think, is very much like the inception of a movie. So I don't know how you're going to kick it off. That might be our kickoff is we have no idea what we're going to be doing, but when it's done, we're going to say we were planning it all along.
Perfect. I think we're in it then. Let's that's the start. Rear Window is what we're going to get into for this first one. So this is 1954 for the release date of this one. Director is Sir Alfred Hitchcock, starring James Stewart, Jimmy Stewart, and Grace Kelly. Written by John Michael Hayes and Cornell Woolrich. Now, easy version of the storyline. There's a professional photographer, LB Jeff Jeffries, which breaks his leg while getting in an action shot for an auto race. Confined to his New York apartment, he spends his time looking out of the rear window observing his neighbors. He begins to suspect that a man across the courtyard may have murdered his wife. Jeff enlists the help of his high society fashion consultant girlfriend, Lisa Fremont, and his visiting nurse, Stella, to investigate. And that sets us up. So we are going to watch a pretty keystone scene of the whole thing. But this is essentially the scene where the main character, Jimmy Stewart, is in and out of sleeping in his wheelchair, and in and out of his times that he's awake. He's observing all the different things that are going on around his neighborhood, and this entire single unit scene that we have set up for this film.
Just say one thing real quickly. The girlfriend, of course, is Grace Kelly, who later became Princess Grace of Monaco. So, and it's 1954. In put in historical context, the Army McCarthy hearings going on, the Korean War, the Red Scare. It's a period of a great American conservatism in particular. And we must never forget, as we watch this, that Hitchcock was not American. He was British-born and very Catholic with a small c and with a capital C. So as you watch it, I hope everyone's remembering that here's this wholesome chunk of American maleness, Jimmy Stewart. I mean, the icon of the period of purity, looking out his window at people unaware that he is a voyeur. I should wait for your question, but I just want to say that what you're looking at there is 5 minutes of possibly the most important cinematic moments in history or cultural history. Um, you, the problem is we get so involved in narrative that we don't step back sociologically and look at something and consider its historical significance. And what's so important at this moment is that in 1954, there wasn't film criticism. We always look at things through the prism of where we are now. And in the 60s, with the Nouvelle Vague, and then the Cahiers du Cinéma in France, and then Andrew Sarris and the more serious American critics, then with Screen and Screen International in the UK, people began to examine cinema as an art form and examine its theory and practices. But before that, it was considered an entertainment. And nothing more than that. But of course, what Hitchcock is doing here is way more than that, and it's an important piece of art. I mean, if we had more time, we would also consider what was happening in music at the time with atonalism. We would look at what's happening at art. This is now after Cubism, and we're into what's happening very interesting in terms of contemporary art practices and the movements that were going on. This is post Bauhaus. This is Picasso still alive, Dali's alive, etc. And if we were looking also at what's happening in literature, how the novel was being reinvented during this period. Hitchcock was very much part of all that intellectually, although involved in something that was, again, seen as nothing more than entertainment. So what's he doing here? This is before Alain Robbe-Grillet and a novel that he wrote later called The Voyeur or Jealousy, and these other very important books that examine the nature of perspective. Jimmy Stewart is all of us. When we go to the cinema, we go to the cinema to enjoy life or experience life vicariously. Once removed, we can see women undressing. That's what pornography is. And that's what Jimmy Stewart's doing. That woman undresses periodically through the film. And he's looking at her. Wholesome, all-American, post-war Jimmy Stewart is looking at a woman through her rear window without her express and specific permission. What do we have to say about that? He's looking at other people, and there's a low-angle shot that you saw at one point. Jimmy Stewart's looking up. He's illuminated from the windows across the way. He's got a smile on his face. I've seen that shot many times before. It's a shot of audiences watching movies. And that's what Jimmy Stewart is doing in that moment, is he's watching a movie. He's watching the movie of other people's lives, which means that we can enjoy those lives. We can judge those lives. We can experience those things from a position of safety because we're not directly involved. And of course, he literally, and you mentioned the trailer where you said he breaks the fourth wall, but literally later we break that fourth wall because he gets involved in the narrative that he's observing, and it comes home to roost. It comes literally into the apartment where he is. It's also no accident that he's disabled, because one of the fascinating things about film narrative is when our hero has made a bad judgment and is in danger, we are powerless to intervene because they're in a movie. So literally, he is powerless to intervene. He is disabled. He has got a broken leg. So he's observing this world, a world that he cannot intervene in, but he can look at, judge, enjoy, or be fearful of, or feel at risk, while at the same time not directly participating in. So it's absolutely fascinating because it examines what is the nature of cinema. I mean, later Bazin in the 1960s literally wrote a book called Qu'est-ce que cinéma? You know, what is cinema? Volumes 1 and volumes 2. But this is 12 years, 10 years before that. I'll check the dates on that, but way before Bazin had evolved that concept. But Hitchcock was already examining it. But what is brilliant about Hitchcock, and why he's such an inspiration for me in my own films, is he bridges the intellectual world to the accessible world of the ordinary. So the audience can find what they're observing entertaining and not realize how they are being subverted simultaneously. How Hitchcock is commenting on the culture, but without some, heavy-handed methodology that makes us think, oh, this is a serious piece of essay about the nature of cinema and contemporary culture. Still an entertainment. The other thing about Hitchcock, and I mentioned the thing of his Catholicism before, just as Jimmy Stewart is passing judgment on the cinema that he's observing, which is his Rear Window, we're passing judgment on Jimmy Stewart. We're perfectly aware that he's doing something a little bit perverse. There's this underlying sense of sexuality, particularly when Grace Kelly arrives. There's this the flirtation. The 1954 is incredibly overt and sexual. And both Grace Kelly and the maid criticize him in part for what he's doing. They don't suggest that he should stop it. It's like the tolerance of the male adoration of the objectification of women and things. They just accept it's part of his nature, but there isn't a sense of approval of it, which goes to Hitchcock's own view about sexuality. You and I talked before about another Hitchcock film, Vertigo, and it's an entertainment, but man, talk about perverse. This is a guy who falls in love with a woman who dies, or so we think. He meets another woman, and he makes her dress up as the first woman. I mean, what can we say about that? That except it's remarkable, but it goes to Hitchcock's nature and his disconnection or his discomfort, I should say, to do with notions of original sin, morality, and specifically sexuality. So just, I love cinema. I love cinema the way Jimmy Stewart's loving it at this moment. I love how it intoxicates me. I find this film intoxicating. I find it delightful. And it allows me to live in a world that's vicarious. It's one of those few films that I can watch over and over again, even though I know how it ends. Sorry, I talk too much.
No. This is perfect. As we were even watching that, something came to mind. So I'm curious, you individually, as obviously a filmmaker and have worn many, many hats over the years, how do you experience film? Are you able to enjoy and just experience film are you still able to do it as like when you were younger before you started making as many films and knew the process and knew how the sausage was made, or is it a constant critique?
It's both things, and that's it's a great question because it goes to very much how I judge films. If a film can engage me to the point where I'm not analyzing it and I'm not stepping back and recognizing its manipulations or its mechanisms, then I start to consider the film successful. Particularly in writing, there's this whole thing about 3 acts, and there's this orthodoxy that is prevailing, that there's one way everyone should write a screenplay, and it's 3 acts, and there should be a climax that comes at a particular point and a turning point, and there should be obstacles. And there are the books that came out. It's very interesting the way thought processes work. And unlike any other art form, unlike painting, unlike philosophy, unlike literature, for some reason, this prevailing philosophy has, I would say, become endemic, but is everywhere in the film industry. And when I'm looking at a film, if I suddenly realize that it's 10 minutes in, we're basically came to page 10, I know that all the people who follow that orthodoxy are going to have to introduce the characters and their obstacle by page 10. And the minute I'm aware of that, a switch goes, and I'm thinking, oh man, really? So I know where this is going to go. And there's been surveys done where they show in an audience a movie, even those who haven't read Save the Cat or any of the books about the 3-act structure. And they stop a film after 10 minutes and they say to the audience, how does this film end? After 10 minutes. That's something like 80 or 90% of the audience. This is not filmmakers. This is just ordinary punters, ordinary viewers, know how the film's going to end. So when I experience that in a movie, when I see that this overt mechanism that is so universally employed, it pulls me out of the movie, and I just say, okay, now let's see what your climax is going to be, how good is the performance, etc. Same thing with acting. When I see an actor trying very hard to show subtext, to engage audience, to show their emotional depth or complexity, and I find it affect rather than substantive, when there doesn't seem to be a genuineness to it, authenticity, it pulls me out. Now, I have this philosophy in terms of directing actors that I love improvisation. because as you and I are talking now, I stumble, I go off on tangents. You see me thinking about things before I say them because I have to think about them because I don't know what I'm going to say next. Very often, with a very rehearsed actor, you have a sense they know what they're going to say, but they're going to say it. I mean, with very inexperienced actors, they'll actually jump a line. You can see them not listening. You want to train your own actors so they'll listen to the other person. You play tricks on them sometimes, where you say to an actor who's not on camera, let's change your lines. So the actor online, on camera, doesn't know what's coming, so has to listen before they respond. Because audiences sense at some level when someone is really listening. They also know the real cadences of ordinary spoken language from the ordinary world. So as we're speaking now, they recognize that we're not working from a script. But in a movie, when they hear things are very, very slick and smooth, and there's no hesitancy, and there's that pause there, and that is listening, another switch goes. Even with them, even non-filmmakers, they're going to say at some level, something about this doesn't seem genuine or real. So that's, I guess, for me, I still want to be seduced. I often reference this idea that I'm a little bit disassociative. So I live in a partially fictive world. I imagine things are going to be better than they are. I have fantasies about my successes or whatever activity I'm about to undertake, what the outcome is going to be. And I recognize at some level that most of the things I fantasize about probably aren't going to happen. But they sustain me and fuel me through difficulties. In fact, I would say they're necessary to my emotional and intellectual survival. Even though I recognize they're fantasies and without substantive foundation, and even without a likelihood of my obtaining the things that I fantasize with, I still have those fantasies. So that's my relationship with cinema, in that I can look at a TV series and can be rooting for the hero to overcome their obstacles, even while I'm recognizing that it is a fictive world. Just like in my own psyche, I recognize that my fantasies are fictive. In both cases, for me, these things are necessary because they make the world an easier place for me to mediate. It's a peculiar thing because people would say to me, "Well, if you know that it's fictional, if you know that you're living in fantasies or observing a fantasy, why is it satisfying?" And I'm not sure. There's probably some chemical release, some endorphin that when we enjoy things vicariously, we take pleasure from them. If there's a fight or flight mechanism, I wonder if there's a pleasure mechanism that works kind of the same way, that when we see the person get the girl or get the partner, when we see the person overcome the obstacle, when we see them overcome something insuperable, is there something that's released in us that gives us a satisfaction, even while we recognize it's not genuine? And I think that's our relationship to cinema. I mean, think about it. 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. Actors who we know, like Barbie, I mean, we know who Ryan Gosling is. We know who Margot Robbie is. So we know that's Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie. No matter what costumes they put on or what they say, we know those are actors. We go into a dark room. There's music playing in the background. I don't know about you, but I don't have a symphony orchestra or synthesizer following me around playing music at key moments. We see the edits where suddenly we're looking one direction, and then a second later we're looking the opposite direction. This isn't the ordinary world. And yet, to use a term from theater, we have a temporal suspension of disbelief. We have decided to enter into this emotional, social, psychological contract with the filmmakers, and we will experience the thing as real, even though it isn't. So it is kind of like we've agreed to be deluded, and we take pleasure in that delusion. And I think it's very significant to our understanding of cinema. So I don't think it's any different from filmmakers. Just when it's badly done, we probably have a slightly harder time, but we still need the same drug. It's harder for us to obtain. That's all.
Yeah, and it's great what you said earlier about getting. I say that quite often. Like when I'm pulled out of movies or disengaged with movies, it's very it's very noticeable. And at least me, because I watch so much nowadays and just consume as much as possible. Like I know the things that bring me out, and usually there's some areas, and whether it's acting or the writer is writing at you and two on the note, whatever it is, once it brings you out, if you're deep enough, it's very, or at least for me, it's very apparent. It's something that's very like, oh, I've been gone for 20 minutes. I was engaged in a completely different world, and it's just very consuming. That's why, yeah, that was great. That's why I'm curious if you're able to actually go there nowadays with all the things that you know about what's going on and how it's made and all the stuff.
Well, it goes
so you're able
the Taylor Swift phenomenon right now with football. I think this is really, if you want to understand cinema, understand why people object to Taylor Swift being in a football game. When I born in Buffalo, followed this team 50 years. We lost 4 Super Bowls. They're playing the Chiefs this past weekend. And every time they cut away Taylor Swift, who seems like a really nice person, it drove me mad. Not just because she was rooting for a team that was in opposition to my own, but because football is like a movie. These guys have helmets on, they have numbers. We know very little about them except we're fed backstory, like good screenwriting. We know that Stefan Diggs got a brother. We know that Josh Allen is the all-American boy and loves his teammates. So we know who's overcome adversity, who rose from poverty, and so on. So our team has backstory. And they put these helmets on and they run around, they throw the ball backwards and forwards. And there's like-minded people, like an audience in a stadium in Buffalo. They had to spend 3 days digging the stadium out, so there's a sense of camaraderie. And so you're rooting for this team, and you want to get lost in the fantasy to believe that if they win or lose, it makes a difference in your life. It doesn't. And if you would ask the members of the Buffalo Bills if they knew what my name was, or maybe even what films I worked on, they probably know White Chicks, but they wouldn't know who I was. So they don't necessarily care about me. They pretend to. We do this for the fans. But that's shtick. They do it for the ridiculously large paychecks, bless them all. And that's part of the fantasy of it all, is that we're going to watch them and we want them to triumph. The problem is when we juxtapose Taylor Swift and we see her not in uniform, we suddenly realize that these are human beings with complexities, and it's a different world. And it's a violation of the fantasy. It's kind of like being in a movie theater and suddenly a commercial comes up at the 4-minute mark and says Taylor Swift will be bringing her tour to Buffalo next Wednesday. It's like, not that you object to Taylor Swift or the concert, but you're in the middle of a fantasy. And they take you out of it to make you realize that there's someone else that has nothing to do with your particular fantasy. So as banal as it sounds, I think goes to the heart of what cinema is. You don't want that dream effect violated. Going to Rear Window, the other magical part of this is that he's falling asleep and there's lightning and he wakes. So he literally is in a dream world. And that's the other thing that Hitchcock was observing, is our experience of the vicarious world that we observe is part object reality that resembles our own world, and partially it's a dream.
All right, so we're back to Rear Window, which is great because I was about to bring it back. You personally, you've already stated kind of where Hitchcock is for you is with directors and your film kind of trajectory, and what was the impact, or what is the impact from Hitchcock specifically for you as a director?
Yeah, I think Hitchcock is significant for all filmmakers in that he puts audience before all other things. And this is essential for any director to understand their craft. Many writers think they write for themselves or they write for a form, which I mentioned before, but they don't think particularly about audience. If they do think about audience, they think about audience intellectually. That I'm going to tell a story, it's going to start here. I'm going to explain this, why the character's doing an exposition, the enemy of all good filmmaking. Any explanation is bad. And then I'll explain this, and there'll be a resolution, and it will be a happy resolution set, and done. Hitchcock thinks differently. Hitchcock thinks, at this particular moment, what will the audience be feeling emotionally, viscerally, What will they be feeling in their gut? And that's the great thing about the examination of any horror film or any comedy film. The two denigrated film forms are the ones that are most purely cinematic, closely followed by the action film. The three forms that we think of as lesser cinema really go to the heart of what cinema is, which is how do you affect audience? So if you're doing a horror film, as a jump scare, classic example, you have someone walking down a corridor and they're looking and looking and nothing happens, and they turn towards camera. So now they're looking towards us and someone stands up behind them. Now we jump out of our seats. The character's not looking, they can't see what's behind them. So like Jimmy Stewart in his wheelchair with his broken leg, we're powerless to participate. So we are that character, someone's behind us, and we can't warn ourselves, look out, you're in danger. That's the first thing. The second thing is film, like music, requires a certain rhythm, particularly in editing. It is literally like a song that you get used to, and then suddenly when that song changes its tempo or its volume, it shocks you. So the shock in the editing rhythm of someone standing up when you didn't expect them, again, makes the audience frightened. But something else, audiences go to see horror films. So it seems counterintuitive because we want lives of peace and kindness and stability, but we like to be scared. So clearly it's the fight or flight mechanism or some other mechanism, some chemical release that we delight in. When people write these books about screenwriting, they never talk about chemical releases. But Hitchcock was very much into chemical release, what I'm going to make you feel. And that is really important to our understanding of how we work as filmmakers. And for me, I have walked this strange line between the visceral. As a cinematographer, I was only concerned about the visceral. Yeah, I would convey information. Here's the character, here's a close-up, here's another close-up, they're talking, you can see the lips move. Okay, easy enough. But now if I'm doing a horror film and I'm pushing the camera in on the back of a person's head and pushing it closer and closer and closer, and we hear a creaking coming from behind the camera in our surround sound, then the audience is going to be going, oh, I feel uncomfortable. If suddenly there's someone at a window, a face is thrown against the window in a rainstorm, and you hear glass breaking, and I have the screen go black, I underexpose it, and the audience says, I can't see anything. That's to do with the visceral. If I'm having a chase sequence, I put the camera inside the car, and the car's winding around corners, and I'm looking to the point of view as we nearly hit building. That's visceral. Where does that all come from? A lot of it comes from Hitchcock. Because Hitchcock was the one who said, it isn't just about story. It's not even principally about story. It's about how I can make you feel. And look at other films of that period. Yeah, there were some horror films, Hammer in the UK were doing some films, but it was still principally about story. Occasionally they would have a scare of, a vampire, appearing suddenly when you least expected them. But Hitchcock really made it into a science about how do we affect audience. And this idea of what they can participate in and what they can't is really runs throughout all Hitchcock's masterpieces, this Rear Window being one of them. He sees the murder, can't participate. He actually, I don't want to do the spoiler, but I think the film's been around long enough that it's okay for us to do a little bit of spoiling. He sends the future Princess Grace of Monaco out into the cinematic world to go get evidence, and he's there observing her and can see the killer come back while she's in the apartment, and he can't participate. He can't rescue. There are no cell phones. He can't rescue. That literally is an example of vicarious connection to cinema. It's exactly what Hitchcock's doing. But then you take another example, another Hitchcock film, similar dynamic, Marnie. Marnie, again, another perverse film about a perverse character who's been traumatized, nearly raped as a child, kills one of her mother's clients. Her mother's a prostitute, has traumatized her entire life, and she's become the kleptomaniac. So she's got a job at the beginning of the film, not the last or the first of Hitchcock's women thieves, of Psycho. the woman, just before she gets murdered, has stolen from her
Mm.
employer, who spots her in the street. I want to talk about Psycho, and I want to talk about Marnie in reference to Rear Window. So in Marnie, she's stealing money from this company, and it's a wide camera shot, and we see uh, Marnie on the right hand side of the camera with the safe open and taking the money out. On the left hand side of the screen, we see a guy coming down a corridor and is
Yep.
surely going to catch her if she doesn't get out in time. So you as an audience are going, no, you're about to get caught, even though she's a thief. And Hitchcock was aware of what the audience would feel. Nothing in the writing, nothing about character development, nothing about Aristotle's view about narrative or any of that stuff. It's just, hey, if you think you're going to get caught doing something wrong, it makes you nervous. If you relate to someone in a movie doing something wrong, you're going to be scared. And for whatever strange reason, you get excited by the prospect of nearly being caught. God knows why. But Hitchcock's aware of it. So I'm going to put it in my movie, and you're going to love it. She sees her boss, and she's just stolen money from him. So the same thing. And we go from her point of view, looking at the boss, looking right at camera. So that same sense of, wow, we've been caught or nearly caught is terrifying. Of course, later, the famous murder sequence, the showered Psycho, same idea that we are experiencing it. So what the way Hitchcock changed the landscape for all of us is he made us recognize that cinema is about visceral experience, and it's about what the audience feels rather than what they think. And it's not just about storytelling. It's about creating feelings in an audience, and audiences like having feelings. And the minute you recognize that, it opens all these genres, horror and comedy, up to all sorts of manipulations of an audience. Audience loses interest in narrative, and that's okay if you're entertaining them in other ways. And how do you entertain them? Scare them, make them laugh, turn them on. All those things work separately and individually, and sometimes in concert with storytelling. And that's what's so great about Rear Window. The story is just bloody simple. And by the way, for any screenwriters watching this, if you want to know how to write, forget high concept. Forget about Martians and superheroes and everything else. Take a really simple concept and make it complex by using cinematic devices to engage audience. Story,
Okay.
you described elegantly, like 2 sentences. Guy broke his leg, look out a window, sees people, might see a murder. That's the story. That's not high concept. That's low concept.
Yeah, so this is perfect. Outside of writer-director, where the assumption is you have as much control as possible for these decisions as far as like how to make the actual audience feel, right? That like, your approach, you kind of have a direct line of how to go about that while you're writing, but then also while you're directing and making the unlimited decisions of all the other levers that you can use. I'm curious, as say a director who's taking on a script that they haven't written, what is your approach to actually create that kind of that experience for the audience, that feeling, that visceral, when you don't necessarily have the control on the paper, but you have all these other levers and controls as a director once you get to that stage of the project? What's your approach on that when you haven't actually written what you're about to shoot?
A great question. And because I'm going through it right now, and I don't know whether I should share this or not, but I'm doing a horror film, and I'm doing it this summer, and it was written by somebody else. And I decided to do it because I was drawn to the central conceit of the script. But I felt strongly that there's some things that I want changed. So now we have this fascinating and very difficult dynamic where I'm saying to a fellow writer, here are my ideas about the way I want you to change your script. Rewriting a script is really hard because scripts seem simple on the outside, but really they're very complex, woven concepts, each tied to the other. The analogy most people use is like pulling on a little bit of wool in a jumper and a sweater, and soon the whole thing unravels. So when you say to a writer, I just want a few things changed, every writer knows when someone says that, those few things become basically the entire script because each thing balances against the other. My issue with the script is that it's narratively very sound. It's a TV. A guy who wrote a lot of TV. lot of TV. I think something like 200 episodes and things. So he
Oof.
knows narrative and construction. But for me, with a contemporary audience, and to do a horror film, I know that I've got to scare them. I've got to find a trope or a conceit that's central to this narrative that will disturb them uh, illogically, because why would any of us want to be disturbed or frightened? But we do, as long as it's safe. Because look, here in Los Angeles right now, if I was to hear some automatic gunfire outside and people were trying to enter my front door, I wouldn't be delighted by that. That was a different type of fear. But if I watched a movie where that was happening, it would be a different sort of still fear, still fight mechanism, but I would delight in it. So that's where I am now with this. So step one, you've got to speak to the writer about how you want things changed, because that provides the blueprint, the structure, the architecture of where you're going to go. You can only go so far with it. Depends what your contract is. I, in this particular instance, may be entitled to do a rewrite after his rewrite, which is painful because I feel a moral obligation to other writers not to do that to them. But at the same time, I have a more profound obligation to the people giving me money to make the film, that I make a film that is successful. So I have to go with my experience and with my intuitions about what will make the best film. But then what I do is I do a breakdown of every single project, every single scene, starting with Hitchcock's principles about where's the audience going to be at this moment. So if I want them frightened, how am I going to frighten them? Can I frighten them just with narrative? I don't know. I'm frightened just with storytelling. We can all tell stories. They're not frightened. But then when we make it more personal, like how we're going to use the camera, will the camera be in someone's point of view? And when it's point of view, you can frighten someone. And then I go to primal nature. Like, what is it in all of us that we're frightened by? I don't want to give the film away, but the concept I'm floating is that this person works on a burial detail at a prison, can hear the dead speaking even after they died and after they've been buried. So when they're working in the cemetery, they can hear people begging to be let out and how frightened they are and claustrophobic they are. I'm glad you made that expression, because that's the idea I had. And it's primal. And everyone I shouldn't be saying this, maybe we shouldn't broadcast it. But when I said it to the producers, the investors, they got very, very excited and thought, wow, this is a great concept. It wasn't in the original script. Now, it doesn't go to the narrative. Yeah, it doesn't go to the narrative. But what it does go to is that expression you had in your face, like, oh, that's disturbing. And I don't want to see it, and I do want to see it. And that's the visceral. And without Hitchcock, we wouldn't be thinking this way. And then from there, later in the film, she's committed a crime, they think, and they're going to execute her. Now, this is someone who really doesn't want to be executed, because there's what I always thought was that there's a certain comfort in execution because it's over. But what if you were executed and put in a box to spend an eternity in consciousness, being paralyzed in a dark, wet space with no one ever to hear you forever? That to me is terrifying. So, and then from there, I then go to, okay, let's talk about camera. Well, clearly, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have a box built with an open top, and we're going to put earth around the outside, my art department, and I'll put the camera directly above someone's head. And I'm going to have that moment when they wake up after they've been buried alive, basically, and paralyzed in death, saying, hello, is there anyone there? It's dark in here. Can anyone hear me? Where am I? I'm buried. I'm here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? And I'm going to have the camera crane up. We'll do it on a stage. There'll be earth packed above the box, and we'll come to the surface. And there'll be the people there at the funeral can't hear a thing. Now, that's a horror film.
So you've walked through, this is interesting. So you've walked through all of this already. So to go back, when you were talking about making the audience feel and the visceral experience, is there anything that you find on the day, or is there anything figured out on the day when you're actually shooting during production that helps with that? Like, do you find any of that in the process, or is it mostly designed?
It's both, and both. You've got to use both, in my opinion, to make a great film. I plan out everything in detail. I have these 7 columns in production design, camera movement, lighting, sound, music, all these things in the service of what I want the audience to feel or think, because narrative's also important. Of course, story and script is part of that, and performance. And I say and performance because I will write lots of backstory for each actor, not about the lives these characters actually lived, because they are characters, but the characters as I imagined they would have lived. So I will create these backstories that the actors can draw on, so they understand and inspire them to have a sentient understanding of the way their characters are thinking. But to make a performance genuine, I don't think you can rehearse, and I don't think you can practice, and I don't think you can instruct or be prescriptive. I think a lot of performance, to be effective, has to be improvised on the day. So even though the script is carefully designed and engineered, I still encourage my actors on takes 2 or 3 or 4 to use the backstory to go off on some other tangents, to say things that are anomalous, to say things that have nothing to do with the story. When I'm teaching writing, I say to writers, hey, be very careful not to do an outline. Outline's the enemy of good script writing. Planning's the enemy of good script writing, because you will write to serve your outline. So same thing with an actor, where I will give them tons of extra, has nothing to do with the script story at all. So when they're improvising, they'll make reference to something that is from their imagined childhood in the backstory that is not from the script. And you think, and a lot of people will say, script editors and studios will say, hold on, you're not advancing the story. This is bad writing. It's not bad writing. It makes the audience believe that the characters are real. Now, when you make the audience believe the characters are real, and now you take those real characters who improvised, talked about their childhood, made some jokes. Robert Downey at the beginning of Iron Man, that stuff inside the SUV, completely improvised. And he's funny and he's charming and he nearly gets blown up and you care about him. Now let's take the film we're talking about, and you meet a character and they're funny and they're charming, and a second later they're buried alive. Now, what impact does that have? And if they were just actors reading lines and you think, oh, it's an actor pretending to be in a box in a pretend movie. But if you think, hey, this is a person kind of like me, likes the same things, talks about Taylor Swift, Buffalo Bills fan, and now has been executed and is in a box buried in the earth and no one can hear them when they're screaming, now you're onto something. So I think it's a combination, lots of planning, and the more you plan remarkably, ironically, paradoxically, the more flexibility you have in the day to tap into spontaneity and discover authenticity.
Love it.
Hitchcock was doing all these things in the 50s. People were just enjoying the films and thought they were ordinary, but really well-made and well-crafted horror films. He almost cornered the market on these types of films. But people weren't taking him seriously as an artist. And then along comes the nouvelle vague and these film critics writing for Cahiers du Cinema, film critics with the name of Francois Truffaut, another film critic named Jean-Luc Godard, and then Chabrol and Rivette, all of whom became really important filmmakers later on. And what they were doing and talking about the revolutionary understanding of film, who did they study? They weren't studying important Italian neorealists. They weren't studying the French farcical filmmakers at the time. They were looking at John Ford and Alfred Hitchcock and Michael Curtiz later and Douglas Sirk. But Hitchcock was a huge focus of the French Nouvelle Vague as an important cineast. And they examined how he made film work. And their school of filmmaking, what became the New Wave, which revolutionized film yet again, was based to a large part on the theories of Hitchcock. And then Hitchcock became this doyen, this god of French cinema. And then people began to look at him and say, oh, we didn't know you were doing that. And he was.
I want to talk about point of view, because that was one thing that you brought up, and then you've already started pointing to it with the feature that you're working on now, specifically about like actually being in the box and their point of view. But this just the limited point of view of our main character, our protagonist, is one of the biggest puzzle pieces of this whole thing and how it's designed. I'm curious, like you as a writer, are you always thinking of point of view when you're writing your characters, or the actual, like, the acute use of POV, is that something that comes later?
It's interesting you should ask. I'm just finishing my new novel called AI Bergerac. And my wife works, who's brilliant, is working as my editor. So I give it to her to get her substantive and valuable criticism. But as I hand over each chapter, I think as I tell the story, I tell it from the perspective of different characters. And I didn't do that in the first pass. But then, influenced by Proust and by Faulkner and by filmmakers, I realized how valuable it was to have my favorite type of narrator, the unreliable narrator, which is a person who doesn't recognize their own excesses, neurosis, needs, or how jaundiced their view is. I love those characters because as a reader, when you're reading Catcher in the Rye, or when you're reading Faulkner, or when you're reading John Barth or any other bit of contemporary literature, and you hear a character who self-aggrandizes, who pathologically lies, who's delusionary, you feel superior to them, but you're still compelled by them because you're fascinated by, going to what we talked about already to a certain degree, self-delusion. Why are they delusional? What need do they have for delusion? Why are they acting in this way that is self-destructive? It's much more interesting than to have an omnipotent narrator or an objective narrator talking about the events in a person's lives, because they're ostensibly attempting to tell you the truth. Here's Holden Caulfield, here's the character of Steve Bernstein novel, and here's why they were doing the things that they were doing. Well, where's the interest in that? And that's not the way we experience the world. We experience the world as our own unreliable narrators. We create our own narratives, and our narratives very often are false, but necessary so we can see the world as ordered as we want to see it ordered. So I have found that in all my writing now, that's the first thing I do is, what will my characters know, or what won't they know? What will the audience know, and what won't they know? And I begin every script, every film, and every scene with those two essential questions. And if you ask those questions first, then the narrative becomes very easy. If your character is driven by their need and neurosis and can't see the world clearly, and they act from delusion, then you've got a really interesting, compelling character. If the audience is rooting for someone that they shouldn't be rooting for, but still feel compelled to be linked with them, then you have a really interesting dynamic. And again, we go back to Hitchcock, in that here in this film, we see Jimmy Stewart, pervert that he is, acting as a voyeur. Well, later in a film called Frenzy, we see someone who murders women. And now he's trying to escape the police. And he's in the back of a truck full of potatoes. And the reason he's there is he's thrown the body of a woman he's most recently strangled in the back. And she has taken, I believe, a stick pin or his ring, and it's in her now, her hand, which has got rigor mortis setting in. He's gone to the truck, and the truck's pulled out of the parking lot with him still in the back. And he's found the body, and he's trying to pry the hand open. And at that very moment, a police car pulls up directly behind the truck. So now we have this dynamic of him trying to pry the hand open. And who are we rooting for? Now, of course, we're reasonable people. We object to murder. We must be rooting for the police to jump in the back and apprehend him. Never. Everybody who watches that film is hoping that he'll pry the hand open of the woman he's just murdered, get the ring, and escape before the police get him. Because we're all perverse. We're all guilty. We're all living these vicarious lives. And again, Hitchcock realized that when push comes to shove, and you've got narrative righteousness, police versus criminal, and then you've got the righteousness of visceral connection, empathic connection with the character, the latter always trumps the former. So you're always going to be rooting for the person who's in that universal experience that you share, fear, near apprehension. This idea of being apprehended constantly runs through all of Hitchcock. I mentioned Marnie already. In Rear Window, later in the sequence, he's seen by the killer, observing him.
Mm.
And he comes across and he comes over to the apartment and tries to kill Jimmy Stewart. I shouldn't reveal it, but that's what happens. So, and that's terrifying because Jimmy Stewart can't move. He's using his flash bulbs to try to get the guy to stop him from being killed. But it's absolutely brilliant, this idea of menace and risk. In Vertigo, the idea of falling. Hitchcock, again, something that no one had done before, puts the camera over the edge of a building and we see someone dangling by their hand. The fear of falling is, again, that universal, visceral, empathic connection. So that's what I do. Learned it from Hitchcock, probably first before I learned from everybody else, is what point of view for the character, what do they know and what they don't know, what point of view for the audience, who are they empathically connected with, who are they not empathically connected with, what do we keep from the audience? That's the classic twist phenomena where we have the big surprise at the end. And what do we include them in? And what do they share with us? You start with that, the rest is easy.
I could do this all day, but I know we're getting close on time. Do you want to hear some trivia about the film?
I would love some trivia. I'm terrible at it, but tell me. Yes.
All right. These are pretty basic. You might know all these. All right. First one. So all of the sound, the whole movie, this entire movie, all of the sound, as far as sound design for this movie, the entire movie, except for the few moments at the very beginning where there's like orchestra music playing, the entire movie is all diegetic sound. So it's, for anyone that doesn't know, that's all sound coming from the actual environment of the scene and from the actual set and actors and environment. So there's no sound laid over. It's all in what I've seen or read and all the things about it. It's all the sounds of the environment of him, of our protagonist. So even another layer, like you were talking about, of putting the audience member right there in the center of the experience of the character, which is
remarkable.
Yeah. Oh, this was so the whole neighborhood, every single building, every apartment actually had running water and electricity. It was all functional living for every single one of those apartments in there, which is cool. Let's see, over 1,000.
It was a set, though. They built that set, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was all practical, like the whole thing. Yeah. But it was essentially a functioning apartment complex there for that whole neighborhood. Yeah.
Incredible.
Let's see, a couple more. There was over 1,000 arc lights used to simulate sunlight. And thanks to the extensive pre-lighting of the set, the crew could make the changeover. You'll appreciate this. So they could make the changeover from day to night under 45 minutes due to the whole lighting setup they had.
That's incredible. I'll just say this about lighting for daylight. Everyone thinks it's really easy when you're in an interior, and that you put up one big light, and that's your sunlight. Well, the fact is that light doesn't just come from the sun. Light comes from the sky as well, and actually wraps around. The thing about exterior lighting is it comes from all sides. So when you're doing an exterior lighting setup, you can't just put up one light because it'll look too contrasty and hard and it will look like you lit it. So I was doing a film called Waterboy with Adam Sandler, and we were shooting, I think it was in the Orange Bowl, and because the stadium had high sides in the late afternoon, we would lose the sun and it would get dark inside the stadium. And we had shot stuff in the morning under sunlight, and we didn't have that sunlight in the afternoon. So to simulate the light and get to carry it on to like 7 or 8 in the evening, we brought in these huge lights called Moscow lights, which are on these articulated arms, and they go up 120 feet in the air and so on. But that light came from one side. That was our sunlight. That wasn't enough. I then had to have wraparound on all the other sides to simulate the skylight. So I had about another 6 Moscow lights, which were these are huge lights, very powerful fixtures. Put them through heavy diffusion, and then lit that from above and from the side. So from every side, light was coming, and from one side, a hard light or directional light was coming. So the wraparound created the real fill light of what the sky provides, and the one non-filtered light was the sunlight, and we did that. And that allows us to shoot an extra 3-4 hours each day, and it matched perfectly with what we shot at the beginning of the day. So big lighting setups for exteriors. Everyone says, oh, exterior is much easier to shoot than interiors. Not necessarily the case.
So last one. I had no idea about this one, but this Rear Window was actually unavailable for 3 decades due to rights issues. Did you know about this? So it
No.
was, yeah, so it was unavailable. You could not see this film. You couldn't get access to this film for over 30 years. And it didn't actually come back to theaters for a re-release until the 1980s.
Tragic.
Yeah, and it was all due to
That
rights.
goes so much to the problems with this art form. Uh, Here's another tragedy that is tied in with all this. We used to master on film. That is, we'd make something called an internegative, which was uses a tri-pack of different food colors, basically. But the best way to preserve a film is actually record it onto 3 black and white strips. One that would represent the blue, one would represent the green, and one would be the red. But black and white film using silver halides. And then by using a special printer that would pass those 3 black and white registers through a blue filter, red filter, and green filter, and recombining them, you recreate the color version of the film. But the film is stored in black and white, and the filters you use are just pure glass, rare earth glass, that you can always bring brand new ones in, so you never lose the colors. You don't have to rely on food dyes. And that's the way films were always preserved, which is why you get a perfect print, probably, of, now that's been officially released, of Rear Window or of Lawrence of Arabia or of any other film that is part of our cultural history. Studios are businesses, and we'll talk about this nexus of business versus art in another session. But these internegatives are very expensive. And they said, you know what, there's digital around now. We'll just store the films on digital. Well, the problem with digital is that these files deteriorate pretty quickly. So our film heritage of these important films which shaped our culture, our sensibilities, our understandings, the types of films you and I are looking at right now, 60 years after the event or longer, will vanish or be in such poor quality, irreparable, and lost forever. So this idea of what cinema is, particularly when we look at Hitchcock and we look at all the other films that shaped our understandings of the world, unless we recognize them as art, we don't see the value in their preservation. And I think film preservation is hugely important for the discussions that we're now having. But just like Hitchcock in 1954, most people see film as a mere form of entertainment that doesn't require any special curatorship. But I think it very much does. It goes to a lot of the issues now that we're about to do, the Oscars and so on, about what cinema is. We've got to remember that the Oscars began as an event to help promote movies, because that's all films were light entertainment. And now there's great controversy about Barbie, about how Greta Gerwig should have gotten an award for directing. She may have. I'm not. Noah and I, Noah Baumbach, her husband, and I worked on many films together. I consider him a friend, an important mind. I would never say a word against him. Delighted. Congratulations, Noah, for getting and Greta for getting Oscar nominations for the screenplay. But when people are judging what a director does, I think they first have to know what a director does. And I'm not sure in their passing judgment on whether Greta Gerwig got a directing nomination or not, they're considering what the job of a director is. And they don't want to, I think, because to this day, film is still seen principally as an entertainment, which it may well be, but it's an entertainment that influences us culturally, alters our understanding of the world, alters our understanding of ourselves, which is all the same things that art does. And it could even be argued that in the rarefied climate of art galleries, the few people that go there may be affected by what's happening in contemporary painting, but are as many affected by that as are affected by important bits of cinema. So if something is changing the way millions of people mediate the world, mediate their sexuality, mediate politics, mediate their understanding of other cultures, mediate history, I mean, for whatever you think of Napoleon, anyone who sees it will forever think that that is at least partially true. So part of the information that we get about the way the world has worked, functions, is from film. So all those things, whether you want to call it art or not, are hugely important. we should be preserving it. And when we're looking at the Oscars, we should be thinking, should we be judging art? Can we really say that a film like, they're two very different films, both, I would say, important in their own way. And for us to try to say this one is better than that one is something that may be more applicable to sports events than it is to art, because all art affects us in a certain way and changes in a certain way. Picasso, Rivette, Chabrol, William Faulkner, Akira Kurosawa, John Cage, all artists in their own right, but I can't compare them and give them a rank order. Who's more important than the other? They're all important because they all affect our sensibility.
You and your natural segues. So we the whole point of this is the end of each episode. We're also going to be trying to, with this series, kind of shoehorn some Oscar talk into it, right? So we are on a run up to the 2024 Academy Awards, which will be March 10th. And the idea is for us to do an episode each week leading up to the actual Oscars, just to get some excitement around it, talk about film before the big film event. But since you're already into it, I'm curious, instead of going through we'll talk about the nominees and get into thoughts and questions in other episodes. But you touched on it already, but I'm going to ask again. I'm curious where you are with judging film. So like you said, art is subjective, but we have massive industry and massive infrastructure nowadays around awards and judging film. So when the Oscars come up for you, for me as a fan, like I love the Oscars. I don't necessarily agree with it all the time, like all the things, but I love just the things around it. I love seeing creatives and I love seeing the people that are involved in it excited on the night about doing this thing. How is it for you? Like observing people being judged for their art? Is it something you're not interested in? Are there pieces that are still interesting for the sake of being interesting? Like where are you with the actual Oscars?
Complex feelings. Making films is hard. Getting the money, writing the scripts, casting, overcoming obstacles, then the reviews, then the release. So there's a certain amount of envy in that a film that's got an Oscar nomination has now achieved a momentum that doesn't require your daily intervention. So a film that's an Oscar nomination, they've made it. It may or may not win the Oscar, but if you've made a film that's had an Oscar nomination, your life and the life of everybody who worked in the film is forever changed. When Monster, a film that I shot, got an Oscar nomination, my life was forever changed, positively. And Patty Jenkins even more so, and Charlize Theron even more so. So I've been there and I get it, and it's fantastic. But at the same time, you're envious because you've worked so hard. You've acted with integrity. You've made huge sacrifices as those who you work with, who you love ultimately because you've been in the trenches together, have worked. And then when you as yet don't have that recognition or may never get that recognition, there's a certain frustration. Am I less than they are? Have I been denied an opportunity? Is some of it fortuitous? You don't know. Of course, you want to claim it's fortuitous because that means that you're not inferior. But sometimes it isn't. Sometimes people may just be better or have created a better piece of art at that individual moment. So envy is part of it for every filmmaker. That why aren't I there? But at another level, there's a camaraderie because many of the people that have been nominated, I've either worked with or know of or know people who've worked with them, or I know people who've worked on those individual projects. And I recognize what it means for their individual lives, in part because I've been there once removed. And so I kind of delight in that. Greta Gerwig just seems a really nice person, is a great person. And I'm thrilled that they're getting the recognition that they deserve because they're real intellectuals, full of integrity, and that's fantastic. I love that an important film like Poor Things, directed by Lanthimos, who I feel special camaraderie with because experiments with narrative and with form as I do. And I greatly admire him, always love every part of his film. That's why it's hard to judge somebody. But I love that he's making the experiments that he is. Emma Stone, because I'm a director of actors and I love acting, I admire when actors take huge risks and do things that I know are difficult to do, like Emma Stone did in Poor Things. It's a very brave, there's nudity, there's sexuality, and there's an incredibly complex character arc, which is a really hard thing for an actor to pull off. And she pulls it off spectacularly. The person she is at the beginning of the film is entirely different than she was at the end. So as an artist, I look at that and say, wow, I want Poor Things to win an Oscar just so people can go and see this film and see my brother filmmaker, my brother actor, Emma Stone, our sister, I guess, do this incredible performance, or see the experiments that Letterman has done and how he subverts narrative to make us re-examine big ideas. If the Oscar gives him a platform so people can examine that, fantastic. A film like Anatomy of a Fall, painful to watch because it's so brilliant. I want that recognized. So another part of me, separate from the envious part, the part that wants to see fellow filmmakers who suffer as I suffer, who fear as I fear, who write as I write, who dream as I dream, to see their films get a platform as a result of the publicity around this event makes me delighted. And I'm thinking, wow, Anatomy of a Fall got nominated. People are going to see this film. They never would have seen it otherwise. Um, and then there's the whole celebrity culture, which is um, kind of scary a little bit. Um, I'll never be as good looking as three quarters of the people that walk that red carpet. Um, there's a sense of exclusion that all of us feel like at different times in our lives, the party we've not been invited to, that we're never going to get the validation that 10,000 cameras snapping simultaneously and cameras running. It's, I think all of us need validation. I remember being at a film festival and uh, the projector broke. And I got on stage to apologize. I was very upset because we'd gotten like great scores earlier in the festival, and I thought this was the end, and I was very upset. And I got a standing ovation. For what? Because the projector broke, and because I stood up in front of this audience. But the validation you get from that is a profound one. And then later, when that film did win awards and so on, and I got other standing ovations because of the quality of the film, not self-aggrandizement, but self-recognition, how much we need validation. So this combination of envy that these people are being validated and I'm not at this particular moment, the combination with empathy that or connection that, hey, these are filmmakers like me who have taken great risks and made great sacrifices, and now they're being validated. And then the more profound observation, which is this disconnect from real connection with the contrived connection that is celebrity culture. These people who are cheering people going down the red carpet don't know those people. They don't know what they feel in their hearts, what they fear in their hearts. They don't know what they're drawing on creatively. They don't know about their own dilemmas and conflicts. They just have become representative of an idea. So when you see Emma Stone walking down a red carpet, are you cheering her because you're cheering the character? Are you cheering her because of articles you've read that her publicist wrote about her? Are you cheering her because she's from Arizona and became an actress? I mean, why are you cheering her? You could admire her brilliant performances and a brilliant performance here, but why the unbridled passion at seeing her in the flesh going down a red carpet? Because of her acting ability? Fair enough, if that's what they're cheering. I live near Hollywood Boulevard, and they put stars in the pavements here with people's names on it. And people from all around the world come and look at the cement work around these stars and then get their photographs taken. There's no one buried beneath that star. There's no magical connection between the star and the actor, except the person's name. And I guess some odd validation that I went to California and I took a picture in front of a bit of brass put inside some concrete. That's what I find curious is the celebrity culture. Well recognized, my own failing in my own envy and jealousy, while recognizing that validation is a wonderful thing, while recognizing that isn't real validation because are they cheering us for our art, or are they cheering us because they recognize our faces? I can't think of any greater pleasure if next year, after GRQ comes out, if I'm walking down just a few blocks from where I live here, in front of the Kodak Theater, having got a nomination for my film, and people are cheering me because they saw the film and it touched them, and they felt I had an insight in the human condition that they were previously unaware of. But I think most are going to look at me and saying, who's the older guy with the large nose? He must be a lawyer or a producer. When are the stars going to get here? So it's a curious thing. And it's both painful and wonderful, and important.